Chapter 15, Treasure of Love, Clyde McPhatter, the greatest soul singer that you may never have heard of. A very good band called the Drifters already existed in America and had done so since 1953. They had been originally founded by a great soul and rock and roll singer who had since gone solo and whom, coincidentally, we were very soon to meet. His name was Clyde McPhatter. For now, though, we were in need of a new name, and it was Jet Harris and Hank who came up with one. They went for a pint, and Jet said, "Let's call ourselves the Shadows, because we're always in Cliff's shadow." I wasn't totally sure about that, but whatever. It was a great name, so the Shadows it was. The forced name change was a minor inconvenience, but luckily, Cliff Richard and the Shadows, had far too many exciting things going on at the time to worry about it for very long. Because we were about to do something beyond our wildest dreams. We were about to go to America. Ever since I'd heard Elvis blaring out of that Citroen window, America had been an almost mythical place for me, a promised land. It was the crucible, the homeland of all the great rock and roll music that had been thrilling me every day for 3 years now. To actually go there? Wow, was it really going to happen? It was. The Shadows and I flew into New York City in January 1960 to play an American tour. We were to appear on a mixed bill of artists that would be like a more illustrious version of the UK tour we'd done with the Kalin Twins. When we landed at Idlewild Airport, it has long since been renamed JFK. We still didn't know who else was on the bill with us. And when we found out, we couldn't believe it. Headlining the show was Frankie Avalon, who was then probably the biggest teen idol in America. There were soul giants, Sammy Turner and the Isley Brothers, doo-wop band, the Crests, instrumentalists, Johnny and the Hurricanes, U.S. teenage rock and rollers, Bobby Rydell and Freddie Cannon, and the former U.S. original Drifters singer, Clyde McPhatter. And we had to match up to this competition night after night. Blimey, no pressure then. We had a couple of days to acclimatize before the tour began. The Shadows and I walked around New York, crooking our necks, gazing up at the skyscrapers, and thrilling at the noise, the bustle, the accents, the landmarks, everything, thrilling at being in America. After a couple of days in New York, we got driven to Canada to begin the tour. The promoters were calling it the biggest show of stars for 1960. They had promo posters made with all of the American stars' names on, and at the bottom was a pink flash with information about a special bonus artist. Extra added attraction, England's #1 singing sensation, Cliff Richards. The tour was to travel around America on 2 Greyhound buses. The U.S. stars were all friendly on the drive from New York to Montreal, but sitting quietly in my seat as the American landscape flashed by, I got a serious attack of the nerves. This was a lot to take in. Just 2 years before, I'd been a schoolboy in Cheshunt. Now, I was in the home of rock and roll in America, with a bus full of artists who, in my eyes, were superstars, on my way to play sold-out shows to thousands of fans in nearly every major U.S. city. Talk about intimidating. Could I do it? Despite my initial terror, our set went incredibly well. I was buzzing afterwards, but still too mortified to tell anyone from the venue that I had puked behind their nice stage curtains. I did confess to the Shadows, though. They all laughed, "Oh, Cliff," then admitted that, they'd all been pretty nervous too. My nerves dissipated, though, because night after night, the Shadows and I were going down unbelievably well. Each artist only had a 20-minute slot, so we were doing the same 5-song set every night. 40 Days to Come Back Home, Chuck Berry song. A Voice in the Wilderness from the soundtrack of a movie I made, Espresso Bongo. My Babe, a cover of a US blues hit by Little Walter. Living Doll, Whole Lot of Shaking Going On, the great Jerry Lee Lewis, of course. Looking back at that list, it feels bizarre to me that I didn't sing Move It. Just about the only tour when I haven't done so. But I guess the promoters didn't want us doing too many of our own songs that the crowd wouldn't know, and Living Doll had been a minor hit in America, reaching number 30. Well, the promoters didn't need to worry, and nor did I. The crowds went crazy for us every single night. The screaming was deafening. My stage moves got the same wild reaction as they did in Britain. They were the same yells, Cliff, Cliff, oh, Cliff, we love you. It really felt like America was falling for us. It didn't. I was to tour in America 2 or 3 more times, but never broke big there. My record label just never seemed to want to put the resources behind me. But at least now, in my latter years, it means that I can walk around there with blessed anonymity. It was beyond anything we had dared to hope for. There were 3 acts on that crowded bill that brought the house down at every show. We were one of them. US teen idol Bobby Rydell, who I will talk about later, was another one, and the third was Clyde McPhatter. Clyde was an incredible singer. He had first emerged in the early 50s in a rhythm and blues group called Billy Ward and his Dominoes, a vocal quintet who also sang doo-wop, so a rather more successful quintones. Clyde's pure tenor gained them a big following and cool hits such as Do Something For Me. Sadly, Clyde got a rough deal from the guy who ran the group, Billy Ward. Even when the Dominoes were one of the biggest R&B groups in America, Clyde had to survive on a pittance of a wage. I'd be on a block where everybody knew my records, he told one journalist, and I wouldn't be able to afford a Coca-Cola. Clyde left the Dominoes in 1953 and formed the Drifters for legendary Atlantic Records founder Ahmet Ertegun. However, he then got conscripted into the U.S. Army like Elvis and quit the Drifters in the mid-50s. Then, in 1956, he had a huge solo American hit with a song called Treasure of Love. I loved Treasure of Love the second that I heard it, wafting out of our radio in Cheshunt. It hung around a stark, almost staccato guitar strum, yet it sounded so rich and alluring. The backing voices could have been from a gospel tune, which was apt because over them, Clyde McPhatter sang like an angel. Treasure of Love remains one of my favorite songs of all time. Easily. It has these powerful lines that pull you in close. A treasure of love is not very far, it promises would-be lovers. It glows like fire and it shines like a star. And Clyde breathes them out so beautifully that you believe every word he sings. For me, it's another great example of rock and roll being colorblind for its listeners. If you didn't know, Clyde could easily be a white man. And who cares what color he is? He has so much soul because he feels the song so keenly. He seems to inhabit every note of it, to live in the textures of the song. I think the emotion you put into a song is what matters, not technique or style. Clyde McPhatter was already a soul and rock and roll icon by the Biggest Show of Stars for 1960 tour, and the Shadows and I were just starting out. Yet I spent more time on that tour with him than I did with any other artist. I was in and out of his dressing room and chatting with him all the time. Clyde was a lovely, quiet and gentle man. He knew about my band starting out as the Drifters and having to change our name to the Shadows. It was nothing to do with him. He'd left the original Drifters a full 4 years before our little band began in Cheshunt. And he couldn't have cared less about the fuss. Phew. We could have been beneath him, but he gave us his time, listened to us play, and encouraged us. He shared his stories from being right there at the birth of rock and roll and rhythm and blues. He was far too modest to tell us that Jackie Wilson, who had replaced him in Billy Ward and his Dominoes, based his singing style on Clyde. Clyde McPhatter never remotely got the praise and the acclaim that he deserved. Some musical historians say he was an inspiration for Benny King and Smokey Robinson. He should have been up there with the very greats of black American music. But it never worked out that way. Sadly, Clyde's career went off the rails, and so did he. In the 60s, he moved between different record labels, but scored few hits. He earned a reputation for being difficult and for being a heavy drinker. He even moved to England at the end of the decade and sang with a club band called Ice, something of a recluse, blaming his fans for deserting him. Tragically, he was only 39 when he died in 1972 from heart, liver, and kidney failure brought on by alcohol abuse. It's so awful and inexplicable to me because I remember that kind, wise, cool soul singer who was happy to hang out in 1960. Clyde McPhatter got a very rough deal. If he'd been lucky enough to find an American Norrie Paramore to look after him, he'd have become the musical superstar that he really should have been. I sang Treasure of Love on my 1983 album, Dressed for the Occasion, recorded live at the Albert Hall with the London Philharmonic Orchestra. With their mass strings and orchestration, it was more lavish than Clyde's sweet original, but I just hoped that if he was still alive, he'd have thought I'd done it justice, because I was standing on the shoulders of a giant.